everyone, and welcome to Can I Just Say? I am Elizabeth Stevens.
And I'm Daphne Olive.
And we are very excited to talk about Jane Eyre today. There is so much to cover. But first, we're going to read some iTunes reviews. And we are very grateful for our iTunes reviews. They really do help us to get out there and get more listeners. So thank you to everyone who wrote in and left a review.
Yes, thank you so much. And also, if you haven't, you can leave us a review right now when you're listening.
There is still time. All right, so our first one comes from Suru, who's a longtime listener, who gives us 5 stars. So again, many thanks. She says, Daphne and Elizabeth do an amazing job of picking apart their favorite things, movies, TV, books, examining them critically, and then sharing their insights. They love to interact on social media, that's mostly you, Daphne, and are open to the views and opinions of their listeners. Loyal fans of their Fathoms Deep podcast will agree this new endeavor is well worth a listen.
Oh, thank you, Sue.
Thank you, Sue.
Okay, and then Sarah and Hardy also left us 5 stars. Thank you, thank you. I followed Daphne and Elizabeth's amazing Black Sails podcast, but was first an Outlander fan. Just like me. I'm beyond tickled to hear smart women discuss my favorite show. Yay for Lauren joining. We will pass that on to Lauren Sarner. And look forward to more. I will watch anything you do just to hear you discuss it. Oh my goodness, that's so sweet.
That is.
Now please give us the room.
Nice little Black Sails deep cut joke there. I like it.
Me too.
Our next one is also a 5-star, many thanks, from Usagi B, who says, delightful and thoughtful discussions by Daphne and Elizabeth, and at times their guests, about films and TV shows they and we love. The discussions focus on themes and characters in a manner that is intelligent and perceptive. Also, the material is always treated with respect, so even if something doesn't work for them, it never dissolves into negativity. They will help you appreciate the material in ways you never expected. Cannot wait to hear more.
Oh, thank you.
That is a lovely review. Thank you, Usagi B. That is exactly what we strive to do on the show. Thank you.
Yes, that's true. That is exactly our goal. And I just want to take a pause for a minute. Like, my review is, this has been so much fun so far. So
it really has been.
That's my review, Elizabeth.
Well, and enriching, which I so appreciate. Like, that was something I wanted to do more with my podcasting, is to make it personally enriching, and it absolutely has been. So thanks to that. Thanks for that, I should say.
Okay, and our next review is also 5 stars from Megan Ithaca. Listening to Daphne and Elizabeth's truly thoughtful, intelligent, and insightful commentary of Black Sails in their podcast Fathoms Deep was a weekly delight. And of course, now they have turned their minds to other films and TV shows. I could not be more eager to join them. Welcome. Every podcast is a delight to listen to, artfully constructed and professionally produced. Yet they also feel natural, like listening to wonderfully passionate, clever friends discuss things they love. Oh, thank you, Megan Ithaca.
That is
so
wonderful.
Sweet.
Yeah, thank you. That's delightful.
All right, now feeling a little performance pressure.
I know, right? Yeah. Maintain that professional producing that you do there, Daphne. That is all Daphne, ladies and gentlemen. And the social media side. She is, again, oh, Captain, my captain.
Oh, thank you. All right. And now we are about to discuss a book that is like a really big deal, and also one we've wanted to discuss for a really long time.
Yes. This actually is the reason that we had the idea for this podcast. We wanted to talk about Jane Eyre. And there were just a couple of different ways to do it. Either take forever and go like chapter by chapter for 3 or 4 years, or just start a new podcast where we can talk about whatever we wanted to. So we weren't really sure how it was going to work out, but that's how we even got Can I Just Say?
Yep, pretty much.
So thank you, Charlotte Bronte.
Yeah. Thank you, Charlotte Bronte, in so many ways.
In so many ways. Okay, so I did pick Jane Eyre this time. So even though, again, it was something that we had both talked about doing for a while. I read this book for the first time just a few years ago. And I remember being kind of alarmed by it, just by how modern it was, but also how timeless it was. And it spoke to me a lot just because I was so fascinated by Jane's faith and her spirituality, and just her sense of self, I suppose. And so I was very interested to read it again in this kind of new part of my life, because that, you know, I feel like the person who read that book is kind of like far behind me. So I just thought it would be a good time to see, you know, on the other side of things, how Jane Eyre spoke to me. So what is your experience with Jane Eyre? How long has it been since you read this book?
I honestly don't know when I last read it. It might have been it may be like a good 20 years since I've read it. I know, which is crazy. And I have a lot of feelings. I'll tell you my history. My history with Jane Eyre is I never read it for school, which is interesting.
Yeah, neither did I.
I read Wuthering Heights with my favorite ever literature teacher in high school.
Oh.
And I loved Wuthering Heights. And so
I've never read Wuthering Heights. That's interesting. I've not heard many good things usually.
Yeah, I have a complicated relationship with Wuthering Heights. We maybe should read it because I think it's would be a really interesting discussion.
Of course, sure.
Yeah, Wuthering Heights. I loved it a lot when I was in high school. I feel like my relationship with Heathcliff is completely appropriate to the different times in my life I read it.
Okay,
he is the ultimate bad boy. He is the super Byronic hero. When I was in high school, I thought he was the best thing in the world. And then I was in college, I was like, ooh.
Interesting.
And I don't know when the last time I read that, but I've read Wuthering Heights a few times. But I've got to say, to be perfectly honest, I feel like I started to group the Brontes together. So I loved Jane Eyre when I was in high school. And then in college, there was a point where I kind of just got mad at the Brontes altogether because I was just like, wow, I hate these abusive men. I don't like these men.
Oh, and interesting.
And, kind of when I was in my super slightly less nuanced stage of my feminism, I became super against the Brontes. And I think that's unfair to Charlotte because I kind of grouped Rochester with Heathcliff, and that's not...
see, that doesn't mean anything to me.
Right.
So okay.
I know. I have very complicated Bronte relationship. And then I read it again, and I think I started to see Jane more, which is very appropriate. That I stopped seeing Rochester so much and started to see Jane when my feminism became more nuanced. But then I haven't read it in so long, and I think I was existing for a long time on the adaptations. And I'm really curious, so for everyone, we are going to, a month from now, we're going to cover some number of the adaptations. Kind of meant to decide that before we did this episode, but we haven't done that.
No, I think we were going to wait until we were done talking about it. I think that was purposeful.
Right. I feel like I've lived for a long time in the adaptations, and even the conversation of the adaptations is really interesting. I noticed that whenever we have, between the two of us and also on Twitter with our listeners, had conversations about adaptations, we all call them by the male actor's name, by whoever's playing Rochester.
Oh, right? No.
Right?
No, you're absolutely correct. Oh, I don't like that.
And I don't think that's accidental. I think that the adaptations become very much, I'm curious now, a month from now, become very much about Rochester. And I don't think that's good.
No, it isn't. I don't remember a single adaptation that focuses at all on the Moore House or the Marsh End end of things, which is so vitally important.
Right. And on Jane's interiority, which again, it's hard because this is
so
is
hard an adaptation. Yes.
Right. Because this is such a close first person novel. You are living, you are embedded, you are completely inside of Jane's head. So it's very hard to adapt that. And the adaptations become, I think, more about Rochester. So I had in my mind kind of veered into this opinion that this story is about Rochester much more than I now, and you know what I mean? It was just it had been so long since I read the book, and then I was just watching adaptations.
Yeah, which are all just played as romances. And it's really, it's a highly romantic book, of course.
Well, but also problematic romances, because Rochester is a difficult person.
He is.
So if you embed your story in
Rochester...
And
it's more difficult, I think, without the interiority of Jane, because she's so great about saying, this is a problem with him and I see it, which you don't necessarily see that happening on screen. You just see her kind of shrugging her shoulders and forgiving him and I don't know how I like this.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. I think Jane in the... again, we will watch the adaptations. It'll be interesting now what my idea
They also
of the
tend to soften up Rochester a little bit in the adaptations to make him a little more likable, I think.
They do, but still, I feel like what we get is that Rochester is this sometimes difficult, but also
surly,
surly but romantic character, and that Jane ends up feeling a little meek. And I again, this is just memory, so we're going to watch the adaptation and talk to them. So we may a month from now have very different opinions.
Yeah, that is my impression too, though.
what I can say about how it affected my opinion going into rereading the book was that I had these adaptations in my mind, and I was like, oh, I'm a little worried that I'm not going to like this. And then I read the book, and I was like, oh, Jane is fabulous. And so, like, it's like I almost went back to my teenage self of remembering why I loved this book. So I've had a very rocky, long, bizarre relationship with Jane Eyre, in short. And I'm really happy that we read this because Jane is a fabulous protagonist, and I'm so thrilled to have been reacquainted with her.
Yes. I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah, I have watched some of the adaptations. I think again, we do this by the men. This is so interesting. The William Hurt and the Michael Fassbender are the two I've most recently watched. I don't like the Michael Fassbender at all. I didn't then. But I watched that one after having read the book. I have not seen the William Hurt one since I read the book.
I know,
but it stays in my head. And I haven't seen Toby Stephens at all. So the William Hurt one stays in my head as being this long, boring, dreary movie.
Right.
And that's like all I can really like. I didn't dislike it. It just didn't quite speak to me. And mostly I just remember thinking how much I liked the performances. And I don't ever remember that woman's name because she hasn't been in almost anything. To be fair, William Hurt has been in tons of stuff. And the woman who played Jane Eyre in that movie the only other thing I saw her in was, I think this like independent French film once. So I haven't seen her in much else. But I don't have strong memories of the film. And again, I have no memory of them even touching on anything that happens with St. John Rivers and Diana and Mary. So if there are people who have not read the book, first of all, I highly recommend that you read the book because it's entirely different. It is entirely different.
So different than any of the adaptations I've seen. I mean, so different, right?
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Well, and her early life. I mean, I think if I'm remembering correctly, I know there's probably people who've watched the adaptations recently are going to probably screaming at their devices that they're listening to us.
Yeah, we'll watch them soon.
But yeah, I feel like the one with Toby Stephens, like that one only touches a little bit on her, on her early life, like just a tiny bit. Yeah. And I just feel like, yeah, again, adaptation's hard. Let's talk about the adaptations in a month. But let's start getting into the book. But yes, I just feel like it was, I just really wanted to talk about my history of it because the adaptations just really, I think, made me think this is a different book than it is.
Yes. I'm not surprised by that at all. Yeah. This is not every woman's story of being, saved from a sad life by a tragic hero. It is not that. Decidedly not that.
Right. No, it is fascinating. I mean, there's stuff maybe I'll save till the end that I want to talk about this in relation to Jane Austen, which I've also,
of course,
because I've read more Jane Austen, although, even if we just talk about Pride and Prejudice, which I know you've read.
Yes.
Because that's how we met. There's just really fascinating differences between them.
Yes.
Like it's just really, I just feel like Charlotte Bronte took us into a place that, like you said, is very modern. Like took us into a place, especially for a female protagonist, of an interiority that I'm not aware of a book before that had that. And Jane Austen,
I'm not aware of a book after it that has it to this degree.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, there must be, but it's pretty good. You're right.
It's very, very dense and very good. And the way that she struggles with this internal conflict and the way that we see her begin to find and understand herself, I've never seen anything like it.
Oh, that's true, because she's so brutally honest with herself about herself. The same way she is with... Oh, interesting. All right, we need to start getting into the discussion of the book. We absolutely
Speaking of which, I noticed, because we compared notes, that my notes start considerably later than yours.
Yes.
So I would like for you to start with how you were first moved. Or I mean, just start from the beginning for you, because my things that I really start to have to say come later. So I want you to lead out, if you would.
Let's take our little break, and then we'll start with that.
Okay.
Do you think me handsome, Jen?
No, sir.
Okay, so yes, early Jane speaks to me a lot and is really hard for me. I mean, I think while I was reading the beginning, I was complaining to you a little bit. Like the early part is really, really difficult for me. I have a very heightened sensitivity to children who are not treated equally as other children. This is just a thing for me. Is just I've always just really had a really strong feeling towards adults who are not fair to children.
Yes, I know that this has pulled you out of Harry Potter many times because I always think that we should be talking about Harry Potter, and you're like, I can't with the Dursleys. I can't.
I know that's true. Well, and I am reading Harry Potter to my daughter now, and it's just like I have to just kind of hold myself together. But the first book, especially because you get the first book, you get quite a bit of it, and I'm just like, this is child abuse. This is horrible, and it's really hard for me. It is very, very hard for me. I find this part fascinating and really important for understanding Jane because I love this inner conflict that Jane's having is that she's such a self-aware child. I mean, again, I think, this is her telling about her child self. Like that part it's different than a diary. This is her. I also love that she addresses her readers. Like I love that. She's like, reader.
I had forgotten, by the way, that this is where we get reader, I married him. I had completely forgotten. So by the time I got to the third or fourth reader, I guessed. I was like, wait, is this where we get that? And then when it finally appeared, I was like, haha, okay.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's just, she is so self-aware. She is so angry. And I just feel like she goes through a lot of the feelings that are very natural to a child who is being mistreated, like that she wants to punish them somehow, that she lashes out, like that she's not. There's so many stories where we have children who are mistreated and you're just like, oh, poor child, they're mistreated. And you definitely feel, oh, poor child, she's mistreated with Jane. But I love that we also get her anger.
Yes.
That we get her anger, and not just the actions, not just that she like hits her cousin or stuff like that, but that she's like thinking about it. You really get her you're introduced to Jane the person, who is a person who struggles with her own anger. It's so raw and beautiful but it's so unfair. I mean, she's just churned through series after series of there's just no way she could win. She has been deemed lesser than from the beginning, and there's no, like, when she's nice, when she stands up for herself, when she does this, there's no way she can win this battle.
Right.
She will always, once she has been declared both less worthy but also bad, she has been declared a bad child, and it's very hard. It's hard to watch adults have just, again, I know it's a different time. I know things were different. The way people looked at human nature and good, and inner good and inner evil was different. But it's just the fact that she wrote that then, and that it speaks so much to the experiences of children now who are in the same position is just, it's very strong. It's amazing. And then you just watch her go back and forth with this, and she tries different tactics.
She does. Well, and I think we also always see, like, with the anger and with the resentment and with this deep innate sense that this is unjust, also her simple childlike, and she carries this through her whole life, desire to be loved and affirmed.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And she even recognizes that. And then others end up recognizing that in her as like that is in particular important to her, that she is a person for whom that is extremely important. And I feel like we get to watch her have different experiences of that. Like sometimes she is despised and sometimes she's loved. And she evolves with it, like to a point where she understands this about herself, not in a like, this isn't fair, why don't they love me way, but to a place where she understands that this is an essential part of herself, and that she can use that for good. That she can use that in a constructive way. Like that's that aspect
use
of her
what
personality.
Specifically in a constructive way?
Her need to be in society, like that her need to be in a world full of people that she can. It goes from like, why don't they love me, to like, I can live with people and be of service to them and they love me, and that serves everyone. Like this is, you know what I mean? She takes it from a like to a positive place where she sees that as like a virtue.
Of just being able to do good to her fellow man and therefore be accepted by her fellow man?
Yep.
Interesting. Okay.
Let's talk about that when we get to St. John. We'll talk about that when we get to St. John.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, I think it's bookended really beautifully, though. So, yes, we will talk about the evolution of Jane's place in the world and also just how she makes her moral decisions, which I think we first see when she comes back at her Aunt Reed, right?
Yes.
When she goes off on her, which
that.
is beautiful and righteous and just. And at first she talks about feeling like she is broken free of something and found liberty. And then, and she says, because she's a child, she specifically says that because she's a child and a child cannot rail at an authority or a parental figure specifically in that way and not feel remorse. She talks about what, like it being at the time, she felt like she was this fiery heath. And then when it was over, she felt like, you know, the blackened ruin that was left behind, and that it was what was sweet wine now tasted of poison, or something equally beautifully. By the way, the writing in this book is so beautiful the entire way through. It's preposterous. It does not need to be this good. The story's good. The writing is exceptional.
It's beautiful. I know. It is, right. Just like imagery just thrown in.
The imagery is insane. Yes.
Right. There were like points when reading this where I was just like, oh God, I really wish I had had time to read it 3 times before we podcast.
Yes.
And then I was like, oh, I kind of regret that we're not doing this chapter by chapter, but we would be doing it for a really long time.
Forever and ever and ever. Yes.
Let's move on now to
Lowood.
Lowood, right. Oh, God.
Yes.
Even that, like all the place names.
The place names are very important. Lowood, Thornfield, and Moor House, which is also called Marsh End.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes.
I did not think about that until right now.
There is so much to think about. We can't possibly cover it all. I know. Yes, but let's try to touch all those little touchstones that we can. Absolutely. And also this. Did you see this too?
Right. We're just going to do the best we can. So, so in the school, let's talk about Helen.
Helen, absolutely. I think that Helen really shaped Jane's personal morality.
Yes,
I agree. A very big way. Yes. I was especially struck by the first time she saw Helen disciplined and standing on that chair. And she's wondering what Helen could be thinking about, because she thinks, I would want to sink to the floorboards and die. I would be asking God to kill me now. And that Helen retreats inwardly and seems to be thinking about something that she has remembered. And then she wonders to herself if she was a good girl or a naughty girl. This of Helen, but also, of course, of Jane.
Yep. I know. See, I have very mixed feelings about Helen.
Please tell me
because I think I am more of a Jane ultimately than Helen.
Yes.
So it's like, I love that Helen, I mean, because think about Jane, considering the world that she grew up in, is like a pretty amazing person, even with her raging and all of her stuff. Like, because she had no models. I mean, okay, Betsy was like a little nice to her, but like
Bessie, yes.
Bessie, right. Mm-hmm. But it was just like, basically, you know, she had no models for how to behave like a person with a sense of morals and values.
Yes.
So I love that Helen gave her a model. I also love that Jane, I feel like, took from that model but didn't try to become it.
I think Jane does that all the time. That is the one quality we can absolutely attribute to Jane throughout the entire book, is that she learns all the time, but she learns by filtering these other people and these other perspectives and relationships and even just doctrines and laws, and filters them through her personal truth. And God, it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous and inspiring.
Yes, it really is. So that's because I love Helen, like I want to protect Helen. I feel towards Helen the way Jane feels towards Helen. You know, it's like, I love her, but I would have been so sad. I mean, she's too meek. She's like, we had in her.
She's too, and meek, I don't even think this is necessarily it so much as humble. She's too, she is truly at her heart humble. Because I think meekness would imply that no matter how she truly feels, she's going to demur. But Helen actually demurs. Helen actually believes herself to be lowly and wicked. I think she believes that at her center she is wicked, but that's in time she will pass through this mortal sphere and God will make her good. Which is tragic in a lot of ways.
So, and then the person who most struck me, I mean, I think it's funny. She has such a small part in this. I actually want Miss Temple's whole book. Like, I want her book. I want her story.
Oh, of course. Well, Miss Temple is very much a guardian and a protector and
Right.
has true compassion. Sure.
Right. Well, and then they have you have this one scene of where they go and spend time with her, and Jane gets to see a world where people talk about ideas and are respectful of each other. And the word that came to my mind was oasis. Like, this is an oasis. And I think for Helen as well. I mean, this is where you kind of understand that Helen isn't just a doormat. Like, that she does have, that this oasis feeds Helen as well in her ability to endure.
Yes. I wonder, I would push back just a little bit against calling Helen a doormat.
No, I don't want to call her a doormat.
I know what you're saying.
And
calling her meek too, because she is those things, but she is those things because that is her acting out what she believes to be morally accurate and right. And that is actually taking a great deal of strength and fortitude, because she is in a place where she is the doctrine that they are receiving at Lobot at the time from Brocklehurst, which is another great prickly name. Yes. And he's awful. Man. He is a bad man.
He's horrible.
Bad man, right? and the book makes no bones about that, I think. Yes. No. But she is being told that she is of no value. Like, he specifically, outright, explicitly states that he wants them to be shamefaced, that is how he is raising these girls, to be shamefaced. And I don't... Helen, in some ways, she does buy that. In some ways, she says, I deserved that punishment because I was naughty, or whatever it was, or I deserved that punishment because I could be more, because I could be better and I'm not. But at the same time, she also has this innate sense of the goodness of God that is in no way shown to her by the place where she is. That's true. Like, that is very specific to her. Like, the fact that she has comfort from her faith is really specific and such a strength in Helen, because she has no reason to. Like, she has no reason to have anything but anger and shame attached to her faith, I suppose.
No, I totally agree with you. And I don't mean doormat in that way.
No.
Totally agree with
It's just that I feel like that's really what Jane learned from Helen. And so I want to preserve it really carefully. Because, again, Jane has no reason to have any desire for or affection for any sort of higher power at all. But she does throughout the book. She carries this...
Or for people at all. I mean, that's what's amazing to her is that a child, you could see a child who had Jane's. I mean, again, the school does, have new organization after the typhoid outbreak and Helen dies. But yeah, you could see Jane up until that point just hating people. Like, she could have become just like just a ball of rage, and that's it. Like, we have moments of ball of rage, but like the fact that she was so attracted to Helen, like the fact that she understood that Helen was an example of a different way of looking at the world, and that she was attracted to that, already shows that Jane has this inner strength. Strength isn't even the right word. This inner complexity. Mm-hmm. That is
an inner, like, compassion for her fellow man, inner, I don't even know what you would call it, but
I don't know.
It's like a respect for the human soul. Does that make any sense? That she should not have.
Right. Exactly. Right. I mean, it's just not that she shouldn't have, but that she, like, you would totally forgive her for not having that.
Yes. And you would say it had been stripped from her, that she had been trained not to believe that it was there.
Exactly. And she managed to keep some kernel of that. It's like you see this progression of her experience and these moments that with Helen and with Miss Temple that like, kind of, I feel like almost like sparked a flame inside of her of another way. I mean, she even says that when they're having their tea, like, she was just like, I never imagined a world like this.
Yes.
And I think that became a beacon for her, that, that she so easily could have just continued with her anger. And it's in there. I mean, I love that the anger stays there too. Like, I feel like that angry child is honored as well, because without that, my God, with all the stuff she went through afterwards, she could have become someone who was beaten down, but she never is. And even or
someone who was angry all the time, like you said, who just lashed out at the world always.
Right. So like it's fascinating to me how this progression, because by the time she gets to Thornfield, she is still feisty, but not angry. Like that's just
I like that. Yeah.
So it's and yet it works. I mean, that's the thing. It's like if the story, if it was in somebody else's hands, you would have been like, wait a minute, is this the same person? Is that person? And I never felt like that. I always felt like it was almost like layers were being laid over her of new experiences and learning. And at the same time, parts of her core self were being given space to express themselves. And that's what's interesting, is that somehow in this story, both, and which is very human. I mean, this is how we learn. This is how we develop, is that we never leave behind our child self completely.
Of course. And
we have new experiences. And I just love, I can't even put my finger on exactly the mechanism that's making this happen, but it was so palpable.
Yes.
That she is doing both of those things, and it all works. It all makes sense, even though she, again, adult Jane or young adult Jane and child Jane feel like such different people, but they also feel like the same person.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's beautiful, that just adherence to truth, but also I have never seen so much a character learn just continually. There's nothing that happens to Jane, and there is no one that she meets where she doesn't learn.
Right.
And that's why I think it feels true, because she doesn't change and she doesn't even react. She learns. And there's nothing that I hate worse than a protagonist that doesn't learn. I cannot abide. I cannot finish the book if I feel like they just keep running into the same walls over and over again.
Right. What's the point?
Exactly.
You might as well just read the same chapter over and over again that way.
Exactly. Yeah. Jane is not that. And I want to talk a little bit before we move on, because we are headed towards Thornfield now, about her innate desire for liberty, and what that means, because I personally feel like we never do quite see Jane at what I would describe as true liberty. We see her at what she describes as true liberty at the end of the book. But at this point, she is, in her own words, of one flesh with Edward Fairfax. So I'm like, well, is that true liberty on your own then? So that's very interesting to me. Let's track that.
Let's track that, because I actually see the end. I see her at true liberty at the end.
Okay. All right. Let's track that then. That's good.
Oh, yay. Okay. That's, I mean, I feel like that is kind of the core actually of the whole thing ultimately, like is not, well, okay, there's many cores, but for me, that's a big part of it, is because, I feel like this is a story of self-determination. Like this is a story of, and liberty. I mean, she starts out basically as a person who's completely subjected to things, and she becomes a person who makes a choice, I believe, completely of free will.
Okay. This is another great thing to track about this book, which is too big a topic. We could talk about this alone for hours. But Jane being subjected to things and Jane making choices, and also the book's overall theme of theism and fairy and destiny and fate and providence and the million names that she calls it throughout the book, which is all fascinating. Because you could say that, Jane is subject to these things, but it also is almost like watching, like those old Jason and the Argonauts movies and stuff like that, like the old Harryhausen movies where you've got the gods up there, like moving the pieces. Like you can see this happening with Jane. Like in what universe does she happen to land at Morehouse with her only kin? Like in what universe? But there's not even, I don't even feel like Bronte is asserting in any way that this was happenstance. She seems very clear to have this overlying what I can only describe in the vaguest of terms as spirituality, like the supernatural, maybe this supernatural force in the book, which is fascinating. But it never takes away Jane's agency and her sense of choice and her own discernment of what is supernatural, what is herself, what is the world, what is true, capital T.
Right. No, absolutely. Because even though she ends up with her kin, and that's ultimately how she finds out about her fortune,
yes.
she has so many choices to make throughout that. I mean, ultimately she makes a really big one. But yeah, you're very aware the whole time that she's confronted with so many choices once she strikes out, once she leaves Thornfield. She's just constantly having to make very, very, huge life choices with such high stakes.
And in those choices, did you recognize a pattern of like what she did, of how she came to them?
Oh, interesting. Okay, I recognize a pattern of like where I think her core self is, how she, like, kind of what her thought process was.
Yes.
Interesting. All right, let's talk about that. We will get to Thornfield eventually, but
yes, but this is throughout.
Right.
She will say, I heard a voice that said, or something like that.
She does definitely.
Every time she makes a big choice. And that I think is very intentional on Bronte's part also, but I also don't know what to do with it because I don't think Bronte ever, again, comes down on one side as to what that voice is. If it's Jane, if it's capital T, truth, if it's capital N, nature, if it's capital G, God, like there's no, and at any time throughout the book, Jane will attribute it to one of those things. Mm-hmm. Or to the voice of Rochester, or to the voice of her past, or to, it's just gorgeous and fascinating. But
yeah, I think I would say that Charlotte Bronte might say that it doesn't matter. I mean, I feel like that's what I'm getting from
that it's
the
all
book.
The same thing. That it's like a harmony of voices.
Exactly. That it's the universe. What I always call the universe.
The universe.
I'm not a religious person. What I always say, like the universe is speaking to you. Like
yes.
It's just, yeah. I don't know if it. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like a lot of ambiguous things in stories. It's one of those things where it's really interesting because you could choose one, or you could just like take your mind down each road and say, well, okay, if we say this is the voice of God, like what does that mean for this whole story? Or if we say this is an internal voice, what does that mean for the whole story? Or if this is the fairies speaking to her, what does that mean?
Absolutely, yes.
Or nature. I mean, that's the thing is like then we get into this tie between like all of Jane's choices also end up being moments where like whenever she's making big choices, we get a lot of description about what's happening in nature and it's usually not so peaceful.
Yes, absolutely.
So there's that as well is that, again, if you go down the God road, then that's God doing that. But if it's like, if you're looking at this as just sort of some sort of thread tying the world together and all of the people and all of this, and then, that's kind of not pinpointing it as one thing. So it could in fact be an internal voice and the forces of nature, which I feel like the forces of nature in this book are end up representing some sort of like universal rightness, like that there is actually a universal, not correctness, because I don't mean it in a moral sense, but I mean and it's not exactly fate or destiny either. It's not that, but that it's almost like there is a rightness and she's always getting clues of what that rightness is. And there's periods in her life, or like periods throughout the story, where she is like spot on identifies the rightness. And there's times when she gets distracted from the rightness, but then she has to re-find it. But she always does. I mean, that's one of the things I love about Jane is that I feel like even when she's influenced by others, there's a point where the rightness kind of comes back to her. Is like, and it's and it's an active thing because she's searching for it, but it's also something that just becomes apparent to her in the same way. I feel like it's active and not passive, but it's active and also given to her.
Imparted. I was just going to say, yes, active and imparted. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like you're right. There's the universe of the world of Jane Eyre has some sort of cohesion.
Yes. That's beautiful.
And so her internal choice making and internal voice, which obviously we're spending the whole time in her internal voice, is in communication with these larger.
That's beautiful. It's like she speaks the language of the universe, right? And she talks about
Yes.
speaking Rochester's language, about the language
Yes.
of his countenance, I think she says, and which is gorgeous. Again, this book is beautiful. But she seems to be attuned to.
Yes.
I'll go with the universe. I like the universe. That's very good.
So let's talk about Thornfield. I have a lot to say.
I was going to say, I don't even know where to begin. So go right ahead. Yes.
See, I was still a little angry. with Mr. Rochester when I first got to this phase. So I'm like giving him a lot of shit. Because I was like,
oh, because just from memory of him and not from how he was introduced?
maybe.
What do you mean?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, again,
No, he's an asshole. From the beginning, he is a prickly
thank you.
jerk.
Okay, so it's not just me.
No, I have written in the margins of this book at the beginning, like, jerk, asshole, fuck you,
Right.
several times. No, I think that's fine to say.
Okay,
Yes.
all right. Because I was just like, dude, stop telling her who she is. Like, stop telling her who she is.
Oh,
and I was just
interesting.
like, but there's interesting things about him. Like, that's the thing. It's like,
Yes. Anytime someone tells you about yourself, especially someone you don't know, you hear a lot about themselves.
right.
Yes.
They're talking about themselves. So yeah. So
Yes.
it was just like, right. But at the same time, I just get very prickly when men start telling women who they are, and he likes to do that. And again, a lot of it, I mean, of course, I went into the reading this time understanding that he is in love with her, and like,
even from the beginning, yeah,
right, because I remember
was so
it because
glad
I know
I was far enough removed to
Right.
not remember like when he starts developing feelings for her.
Oh yeah, no, I
Yeah.
knew, and I was just
Basically,
like,
from moment one.
right. And I mean, what's interesting? Okay, there's two things that are interesting about his reprehensible behavior.
Okay,
I'm not excusing his behavior, but I'm understanding his behavior. Let's say that.
that is very Jane of you.
That is, well, again, and I don't mean understanding in an excusing sort of way.
Right.
I mean in a
No.
dissecting sort of way.
Absolutely, yes.
So, like, on the one hand, he's got a bit of that, like, middle school boy thing where he's like, I like you, therefore I'm going to torture you, which I hate. And I hate that in stories. I mean, it is totally a thing.
Uh-huh.
And at the same time, I hate that ends up in stories all the time. You know, just like that whole, like, I will pull your pigtails because I like you thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that's interesting to me is that in his telling her who she is, he said, I envy you your peace of mind, your clean conscience, and your unpolluted memory, which is hilarious when you
Right.
know Jane's story. It's like, wow, she's pretty got a lot of turmoil in there. Like,
Yes, uh-huh. And has been through quite a lot. Unpolluted memories, indeed. Yes, uh-huh.
Exactly. I mean, we know that she's haunted, and we'll have the meeting of Mrs. Reed again. We know that she's actually haunted by her fiery childhood self to
Yes.
some extent.
Yes, in the Red Room.
Right. Oh God. Right. We didn't talk about that. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know how. We don't need to talk about that. Everyone knows it's horrible.
It's horrible. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm sure there's all sorts of literary
Yeah.
stuff we could talk about with ghosts and stuff. But you know what?
Sure. Well, Jane specifically states that she was never the same after that incident, that she was always more anxious. She was always more timid and afraid, and always just more, that it just messed up her mental health permanently.
Yep. Absolutely. And I think that, I mean, again, in some ways, I believe that actually the insidious breaking down of her on a daily basis was probably ultimately more damaging to her. Like that really
Sure.
a child lifetime of just always being diminished and diminished and diminished and diminished. But that's a striking thing that's really good for the story in her own mind of herself, of what did it. You know what I mean? Like, like it's almost like if she could pinpoint that to one moment and say, this is why I am the way I am, that would be easier to stomach than
Sure.
if she was actually saying, I was actually abused every minute of every day
Right.
for my
Although
whole
she does
childhood.
seem to be aware of that because she just walked us through all of it.
She did, but I think still putting the focus on the one event was, to me, makes more sense. I mean, I'm not trying to diminish how traumatizing that event must have been, but I'm just saying I feel like that And maybe she's doing that for the reader. I mean, she's very conscious of her reader.
She is very conscious of her reader. Sure.
Maybe her reader would be more moved by this one event than, in case she's not trusting her reader. Again, a person who is systematically abused doesn't necessarily trust that people will ever see her side of it, because that was her experience as a child.
That's really interesting, yes.
Her experience as a child was that no one ever saw her as abused. They only saw her as bad.
Right.
And this one moment is a moment where it's completely obvious that this was an abusive moment.
And there was a witness to it, yes.
Right.
And a doctor who said this is what happened. Sure.
Exactly. So, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm getting too psychological about the Jane who's telling the story, but... But that also makes a little bit more sense to me as a way like, look, they did this thing. You know what I mean? Like the systematic abuse, adult Jane, I think, would easily still believe that nobody's ever going to see that as her being abused. They would only see that as her getting what she deserved, which was what she was taught.
Right. Yeah.
Even though young Jane railed against that, but she knows, but her experience over and over and over again was that the world... Even Bessie, who was nice to her, was like, well, I like being nice to you when you're being nice.
Yes.
Right? So even the most benevolent adult of her young life still was conditional about it. Wasn't like, I want to be nice to you because, oh my God, you poor thing.
Right.
It was like, you're being nice right now. I mean, you're not very pretty, but you're being nice right now. And like pretty girls deserve better treatment, obviously. And... I know. Okay, enough about that. But what I want to say about Rochester here is that we, like that thing that I said about Jane having this clear way of correctness, like this clear, correct way to go. Rochester has lost that. Like Rochester, I mean, you can almost believe once you know his full story, and the fact that he tries to save everyone in the fire. Like he also has a core of that. There is a core of goodness in him.
Which I think she sees from the very beginning.
I know.
Yes.
She is a better person than me, I hope. I mean, again, it's so easy to read this. This is where I've had problems with it. It's so easy to read this as like, why are you, this dude sucks. Like, go find some nice person.
Well, but remember, he says from almost the very beginning that his experiences have made him hard, like an India rubber ball, but there is a chink or two still yet. And what does he say? There's a sentient lump inside. Do you think there is still hope that I might be transformed to flesh? And at first Jane is like, how the hell would I know?
Right.
Until she realizes that he has already sort of appointed her as the person who can help him make this transformation, the person who has at least inspired him to begin the transformation on his own. And I think that's what appeals to Jane more than anything, is that she believes him to be a better man than he is, because he believes himself to be a better man than he is and wants to be, because he has been in so many ways not as strong as Jane, because Jane has seen her circumstances and said, I will learn and grow from these. And Rochester has seen his circumstances and said, well, these have soiled and ruined me completely.
Right. No, and also I think the thing that, as much as like, I feel like my notes about Rochester's interactions with Jane are in two groups. One of like, stop mansplaining. And the other one is, I love that what he obviously, even when he in the beginning, even when he's being super harsh in the beginning, the thing he focuses on, even when he's being cranky about it, is how no nonsense she is. And this is something very specific to Jane that I feel like before Rochester, no one has valued. Like she always saw that as a bit of a failing on her part, that she will speak her mind and not filter herself and all of this. And even though he's complaining about it, I think even the fact that he calls it out, that he so much notices, like, you just speak the truth. Like, what up with you, you weirdo? But even though he's being cranky about it, it's like, I feel like for her, that must have been a huge deal, that he he was seeing her, even
Yes.
though he was complaining about what he's seeing.
Well, and I think even in the complaint, you're right, it was that kind of like middle school boy. Like it's very clear that he was delighted by it.
Right.
That he was at the very least compelled, but I would say delighted that, and she could see that because I think this is also true of Jane through the entire story. And it's where we see her at her, I think what even she would say at her weakest is that she does want to be affirmed. She does want to be loved and accepted and seen. And he does it better than anybody else in the book as far as like acknowledging and seeing who she is and just being genuinely delighted by it, wanting to be with her and near her.
Right.
It's what gets her in so much trouble later in the book, I think.
Yes.
We'll get to that.
Yes, we will. So yeah, I mean, it's just, I don't know if we have to talk like too much. I know it's like, because even though the adaptations are all about Rochester.
Oh, I have more.
I mean, I can get super angry with him. If we start getting into details, then I start getting angry with him. But I do.
That's okay.
His saving grace in my eyes for Jane is that she doesn't seem to be bothered by his crankiness, and he sees her. He sees a side. It's not just that he sees her. He sees a side of her that no one else valued, and that I think
that no one valued, sure.
And that she values. She values being clear-sighted. She values that, and he values the fact that she not only sees things for what they are, including himself, but that she will say it without editing herself. And that, again, I think that she had been up until that point. I mean, think about it. As a kid, what they gave her hell for was that she said things she wasn't supposed to say as a child.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah, of course. And you could argue that she's not supposed to say, certainly as a governess in his household. Secondly, as a woman in the world, period.
Absolutely.
Yes.
None of the things she says to him.
She's very assertive.
Right. And even when he draws it out of her, she just doesn't, spend time working on like, what is the polite way? What is the way I'm supposed to say this? And sometimes sometimes she's like, oh shoot, I did that thing again, where I didn't speak the way I'm supposed to speak. But again, she found a person as cranky and obnoxious as he can be. She found a person who like valued this aspect of her that is really essential to her. I mean, one of the things I love about Jane, when we said this in the beginning, that we love her honesty, even when she's pointing it at herself, especially when she's pointing it at herself. This is why they work for me as a couple ultimately, is because don't 100% see what she sees in him, except for this one thing, is that he actually values this beautiful thing about her.
Right.
A thing that I think because of her station, because of her gender, because of her upbringing, like she just wasn't supposed to have this trait, but she does.
Mm.
And again, it all goes to truth. Like, I mean, again, this is just like, it's almost like Jane is her essence is that of truth.
I'm sorry. I'm interested by the fact that you said you can't see what she sees in him. Certainly at first, yes. By the time he has the party and the people are all over, I think it becomes a little more explicit that he is charismatic and can be jovial and can play the host well and can be like the life of the party. Him and Blanche. Blanche is the worst though, right? Like all the way through, no matter what, always the worst. Don't understand.
Yep.
Woof. Yes. Okay. Just making sure everybody's clear on that.
I know. I can't wait until when we are talking about Jane Austen. I really would love to do like a compare and contrast of how society, like how these moments are treated by Jane Austen and by Charlotte Bronte. It's so incredibly different. Like it's such a familiar, if you've read books of that period, you're just so familiar of like the party that has all arrived and they're all just like basically doing nothing. They're just like rich people doing nothing.
Yes.
And I love how this is. Like, I just, it's just like we, in Pride and Prejudice, you have a lot of moments, even though Lizzie Bennet is more of those people, she's not separated by class from them, but still you spend a lot of time kind of being aware of how Lizzie is judging that, even though it's not, but you're not deep in Lizzie's mind in the same way.
But I felt like Jane did not seem to judge it very much. She seemed to genuinely enjoy the charades.
Yes.
Watching the charades game, which was fascinating, actually. That did seem like a lot of fun. Although, again, Rochester being just the worst, just awful.
Yes.
That all of it is contrived, specifically picking Bridewell and showing the like faux marriage ceremony to Blanche, just a giant fu to make her jealous on purpose.
Right. Oh no, he's right. Exactly. I mean,
this is the least likable Rochester for me. In that the gypsy. Okay, Rochester as the gypsy. What the hell are you doing, Rochester? What is wrong with you?
Yeah.
And he says to the staff, like, that he only wants to see the young unmarried ladies. Oh. Like, he's just fucking with people now.
Yep.
He's
yes,
just
he is.
being a jerk. And then he brings Jane in. I genuinely can't tell, as the character Rochester, what his motivations are now for having Jane in the room.
I think, I mean, he's just so stupid. I'm sorry. Like, okay, I don't want to say stupid.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
He is. He's kind of dumb. Like, he's just not really good at people. I think he just keeps waiting. I mean, eventually she does it, but he keeps waiting for this very unrealistic thing of his employee.
Yes.
Suddenly being like, I'm in love with Rochester. And I think honestly, I think that's what he wants, is he brings her in there because he wants, right, he does the whole jealousy thing. But I think he thought he had this crazy plan in his head of like creating all this jealousy and like hanging out with Blanche in front of her and then doing this gypsy charade so that he would then, I guess because he thought that maybe Jane would say that to a gypsy because of somehow.
But why get her to say it like the minute he drops the act,
right.
She says, I would do everything in my power to serve you my whole life or something like that. Like
exactly.
After she calls him out by saying, this was
right.
unfair and not right and unjust and what the hell is wrong with you, basically.
But those two things aren't unrelated. Is that like he had put her in a position where their relative class was so apparent through this whole period of having this party there. Like what did he think that she was going to do? But then when they're again, like, and right before he went and got all of them, she had been kind of approaching a place where she had started to really like break down in her own mind this class barrier. I mean, he didn't know that, but also
right.
He's just really bad at reading people. I'm sorry. Like, it's just like the whole thing is pretty crazy. Like, first of all,
yeah, because we had just gotten, I guess, that she could see that these were not his people, that she was on a level with him in a way that they were not, right?
Right. But also, it's just like, what did he want from her? Like, it was so
This is what I'm saying.
Like, it would be so inappropriate. She would be, again, like, let's talk about the class thing here. Like, she is his dependent. They even use that word. Right? She is
half his age,
right? And she
which
is
I'm not wild about, actually.
No, not at all. She very common in that time.
I know. Still,
I know.
Having been a 19-year-old who married an almost 40-year-old, I'm just saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Not a fan.
But he pulls her pigtails over and over again and then thinks that she's going to put not just her heart, but her livelihood. I mean, again, Jane happens to be a person who thinks way more about her heart than her livelihood. But just in the world, it's pretty unrealistic for him to think that his dependent, his employee, would just up and like take that kind of risk. And what this all points to for me, is the same thing that when he said those crazy things about her being a peace of mind and clear conscience,
right.
Is that he's so messed up. He's just so broken that he sees her, who's not really that person, and reads all of this peace and all of this, I'm looking for words other than peace, but all of this like peaceful being in this person who's in Jane, who's not really that much at peace to begin with, because he is in such turmoil. He's so bad at all of these things because he's completely broken. I think that he can't see straight. He can't see what he's doing. He can't see the situation, which again, let me be clear. That does not excuse this horrible behavior. No. But I think what it is that he's so broken. He has so lost that path. He's so like, Jane, will veer a little bit from the path of like the correct way to go through life. But he's just like, he's lost in the woods. Like his later house, he's in a house that you can't find the path to because it's been so overgrown. Like, I felt like that was such a great metaphor. He is so lost to himself and so lost to a path of what is correct. And
Right.
then only in moments of like where he can't think about what he's doing, like in a fire, that's when he does good things. He does good things when he's under
very
duress.
interesting. Sure.
And he doesn't have time to like think it through, but like when he thinks about stuff,
He gets lost. I like that very much.
yeah, his thinking is just he's just so damaged that I don't know if he really can see right and wrong anymore.
Okay, so leading her on, which is what he's doing this whole time, and trying to like trap her, which she says, "You're trying to draw me out, sir. It's not very fair." This is after he's like
Right.
pulled off the mask and shown himself to be who he is, or whatever it is. I'm trying to figure why he's trying to draw her out in this way instead of just asking her, which I feel like can only be because of the same reason that he tells Blanche that, well, actually, Mr. Rochester has no money or not, or a third of the fortune that you think he does.
Mm-hmm.
Is it just that he's afraid that she would marry him anyway just for the money and status?
Oh, wow. That never occurred to me that he would think that of her, of Jane. I think it's insecurity. Well, I think it's two things. Okay. I think it's insecurity because, again, he's broken. He seems to think, I mean, I suspect that both of them are actually fine-looking people that both just think they're ugly. Like, I did write in my notes at some point, like, are we supposed to actually believe that they are not attractive people? I mean, definitely Jane is more attractive than we think because, like, in the later parts of the book, and maybe this has to do with, you know, her finding her true self. But at the end of the book, we have more than one person tell her that she's beautiful, that she is, in fact, beautiful.
Did they say beautiful?
I think even the servants did say that, like when she announced that she was...
No, the servant said, clearly she's no beauty, but anyone who has an eye can tell that he thinks that she is.
Oh, okay. No, but there's it was someone...
I think Diana says something about her being pretty. We get a lot of external commentary about her being plain.
Right.
Which might just be her hearing it, like her ear being attuned to it. But I'm certain that she is not a great beauty and he is not...
Okay.
A great, handsome man. They're probably completely average people.
Right, exactly.
Which are then
not Grecian.
Lovely in the eyes.
Really,
right.
Everything's Grecian. It was fascinating. That was just like...
This is the time period, yes.
Right. It's so interesting to me. I know. It's so, you know, cultural, yes. Cultural and time period ideas of beauty are fascinating to me always. I think ultimately what makes him not do this is his own internal conflict. I think he knows what he's doing is wrong. I mean, I think that's ultimately it, is that he knows he shouldn't be doing this in the first place. And so he's constantly in turmoil over what he's doing. So he's kind of doing it like he's doing it, but not doing it. And I think that, again, as self-aware as Jane is, and I think this is a huge part of why he's attracted to her, is that she is self-aware and sees clearly, and he does not. It's not an accident that he goes blind afterwards. Like,
yes.
So he doesn't see clearly, and he's just so, I think he's just so conflicted. And then until the moment when they are actually declaring themselves to each other outside in that storm under that chestnut tree, and that's when he says, like, I think we both put this in our notes. He says, "I know my maker sanctions what I do. For the world's judgment I wash my hands thereof."
Yes, although I think he does not actually believe that.
No, I don't think so either.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
This is a big thing I think about Rochester that I think is just fascinating as just character work, is that he repeats this thing over and over and over again to himself. So it's like, if I keep telling myself that this is what is true, then this becomes what is true of me. But he never actually believes it. Whereas Jane says instead, okay, what do I believe to be true of me? What do I believe to be true of me? Which is very, very different from Rochester, like telling himself this story.
In fact, the opposite.
So if he honestly believed that his marriage was not a true marriage in the eyes of God or man, and that he was in fact completely free to marry Jane, he would have told her about his wife.
Yep.
But he doesn't.
But see, I also think he would have, I mean, again, I think he has a lot of insecurity, but I think that also that speaks to the way that he wooed her. I don't even know if I want to call it that. Like that his treatment throughout also speaks to that same thing, that he knows he's not supposed to be doing it. It's not just that he's not supposed to marry her. He's not supposed to be trying to get her to say she loves him. He's not trying. He's not
to be winning her love at all.
Exactly.
So he already feels duplicitous, you mean?
Exactly. He is.
Oh. Because of course he is. He's telling himself that he's not.
Right.
And, well, the fact that he's muttering to himself as he holds her.
Right.
I have her here. She is mine. I will hold her.
Right.
And she's happy, so that will atone. It will atone. I know my maker agrees with me in this. It's like, well, obviously you don't, or you wouldn't be chanting this to yourself so desperately.
Oh my God. I know. He's just so wrong. And this is actually my favorite, like, nature moments, because especially in this period, like, especially in these kind of romantic stories, like the fact that it's stormy and the trees swaying, like, you could believe that storm is about passion, is that their passion is so great that is affirming what they're doing.
Oh, uh-huh.
But you could also see this as exactly God saying, like, that his maker going, dude, no, actually, I don't actually sanction this thing you're doing. Like, this sucks what you're doing. And I feel like, right. But then the lightning the lightning hitting the chestnut tree was the final answer, was like, no, this isn't about passion, because nature broke a tree in half.
Wow. That's so interesting. Yes. So that's right after they, oh, yeah. Okay. I guess I saw that more as like foreshadowing that this was not going to work, that something external was going to divide the union of the two of them.
Totally doing that as well. But I feel like nature is speaking throughout this
story. The novel, certainly. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Seasons are so important, and everything about nature.
Right. Well, like, I mean, just like, remember when St. John came to tell her about her inheritance, there was snow, and he had to go through snow drifts. Like, it was like nature was trying to keep him away from her. It was just like, I just feel like nature is a character here, and not in a fantasy novel sort of way. Like, not so much that you're like, oh, nature's a character, but just enough to, like, really influence your experience of scenes.
Yes,
but not so much that it's like beating you on the head with the idea. I mean,
sure.
I like stories where nature is like beating me on the head with
beautifully done here,
right?
Yes.
But here it's so subtle. But if you choose to look at it, I mean, again, my interpretation is one. I'm sure there are other ways to interpret these moments where nature. But this is what I felt like, that nature was like guiding again with this, like, this thing of, like, the universe,
right?
Not determining, but having a say. Like, influencing.
So I think your Jane is showing here. So are you saying that you think that, okay, because we're going to soon get to that argument. Also, how do you think about Jane being naturally hard and very flinty before we move on?
I know. Don't you love? Okay.
Were you delighted?
Right. So yes, for people who didn't watch Black Sails, this is just happens to be really
pretty great.
Fun.
Pretty great.
That Toby Stephens plays Rochester. He also plays James Flint. So, like, every time I saw Flint, I was just like, Flint.
Yes. So, okay. So we have Rochester, and I'll have to touch on a few other things too. First of all, he's always referring to Jane as this fairy or this elf or an angel or an otherworldly creature. And in doing so gives her supernatural power over him, which she has a very natural power over him. But he attributes it to this supernatural power, right? And she consistently says, no, she shuts that down all the time. Don't put that on me. I will disappoint you. I would never put that on you. I am Jane Eyre. That is all that I am.
Well, it's also just like, for someone who's such a plain speaker, I mean, she's really not. Again, it's a moment where he's like expressing her in the opposite of what she actually is. Like, she's not, there's nothing ephemeral about Jane.
No. Well,
she is the opposite.
I mean, you could see that a bit. That all speaks just so much to Rochester's personality. He is an extreme romantic. I mean, he says to her, you haven't fallen in love. Your soul has no chance to have been awakened yet, basically. Like, that's a deeply romantic thing to say, especially for somebody who pretends to be such a hard ass. You're like, oh, come on.
I know. It's also just, sorry.
I know that doesn't work for you. I am a high romance, so it works for me.
No, it just cringes. It makes me cringe from him because he's just kind of abusing her the whole time. That's why it bothers me.
Oh, sure.
No, I don't. I like the idea of it very much. I just, if coming out of his mouth, it just makes me angry because he just, again, it's like I feel
See,
like
I don't see him as being that abusive to her so much as he is. I always just think about the way he talks about Adele and Miss Fairfax, and that's when I get really cranky at him. That's when he's so mean-spirited. But I feel like to Jane, he's mostly like he'll pick on her a little bit, but she obviously loves it and gives him as good as she gets. So I guess I don't worry about it so much with the two of them.
Fair
just
enough.
Because she's so great at defending herself, I never feel that need to jump in and defend her. But the fact that he talks about Miss Fairfax and Adele the way that he does when they're not there to defend themselves makes me very angry.
Okay, I think that's fairer. He makes me angry.
That's that's completely all right. Yeah. Well, and he's in this fantasy world. Like he sees Jane as fairy, and he has this whole thing about how he's going to take Jane to the moon.
Yeah.
When he's talking to Adele about that, which is
or take her to Europe when he's already married to someone else.
Right. He's just this idea that he can just run away, that if he just says enough times that this part of my life isn't real and doesn't matter, that will become true.
Which is what he had been doing all the time up until then. I mean, this is the whole story with him in Paris with
Right.
with
Sure.
it just this is all he's ever done. He is a person who, up until, like, if we had the Edward Rochester story, you would have stopped reading because he just does the same thing over and over again.
Oh, yes, you're absolutely right. Good Lord, yeah. I
Right?
sure would have. Yes.
He thinks he's doing
That's a great
something
point.
different with Jane in the beginning because he's like fallen in love with this person that he sees as virtuous and true and like the opposite of him, which she is. But so I think he thinks he's doing something different, but what he wants to do is draw her into the same narrative he has been doing over and over again. He has been doing a cycle. He's been doing a cycle of I've been wronged, my life sucks, I will run away, I will do whatever suits me. I will even which is okay because I'm so wronged that if I'm completely self-indulgent, that is justified because I've been so wronged. So he's in this cycle. And then he falls in love with her. And I think in his mind, that was like a step forward. That was a step outside of his cycle.
Which is true.
Which is true until he wants to bring her into the cycle. Which is what he wants to do, is just like draw her into the cycle.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Yeah, I like that. And she, of course, refuses.
Right. And she's like, why do I need fancy clothes? Like, even with the wedding dress, she's just like, this isn't me. She's just like,
Right. Sometimes I think, though, she gets a little bit... Sometimes I think she digs her heels in where there is no reason to.
Yes.
Which is interesting about her. Like, I'm not quite sure what point she's trying to prove, unless it's just, you cannot master me unless I let you. In the places where I let you. I think that she sometimes draws completely arbitrary boundaries just to prove that she can.
I think that's true. I also think this is part of her evolution, and we need to get into her relationship with St. John. Like, I think this is something that she learns she doesn't need to do because she sees the extreme version of it in St. John.
Yes.
So this is again her learning.
Yes.
It's like there's some part of her that sees a basic virtue in being simple, in not being self-indulgent because, and again, not to always go back to her childhood, but I think that part of the narrative that she was told as a child was that she is too self-indulgent with her anger and her speaking out and her this.
Oh God.
So she wants to prove that she's not self-indulgent. And then she again had the model of Helen. So she was like, cool. That's a good model. I'm going to be not worldly. I'm going to not care about worldly possessions and stuff like that.
Wow.
And I think that actually St. John with his
puritanical...
Oh, God, he makes me angry. St. John with his completely self-serving use of denying material world actually showed her that is not a road she needs to take, that she can be good without being self-denying.
I do like that. Well, it's just because I just realized today on the way home from breakfast that she wears only black, white, and gray through the whole thing until the very last scene when Rochester is getting his vision back and he asks her if she is in a pale blue dress.
She is in a pale blue dress.
And she's wearing a glittering something. She's wearing
the
something
pearl,
beautiful.
Right. Oh, I just assumed it was the pearl necklace that he had
No,
given
he said
her.
a glittering ornament.
That's true.
So it has to be...
Oh, nice. Oh.
Right?
Oh, thank God, Jane. See, so this is getting to where we started in the beginning, where I think she is completely, what was the word that you wanted? That you said that she's completely independent. I think she is.
Oh, at liberty. At liberty. Yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense. It's not quite, I guess it's not autonomy, But it doesn't have to be for all people, I think.
But it is autonomy. I mean, because she has her 5,000 a year. Like, she could pick up and leave at any point.
No, that's independence. That's not autonomy.
Right. Oh, yeah. See, this goes to like people from Fathoms Deep will be aware of this disagreement that you and I have that we had with Jack and Anne. I don't see binding yourself to another person as the opposite of autonomy.
That's true. You also don't have 2 divorces.
Right. Exactly.
Yes.
So this, yeah.
But yes, that's exactly what this argument is. Yeah, it's not even a real argument. It's just
It's not about the text. This is just a Daphne and Elizabeth worldview thing.
Yes. But you're right. It makes me a little nervous. However, she clearly feels and believes herself to be at liberty. And I also believe her. I believe that she is at true liberty. It's just not one that I quite recognize as such.
Right. But see, I see it as liberty because okay, let's talk about St. John and then we can get to the ending. But like,
just before we move on, we have to talk about their big fight before they leave, though, Daphne. We have to. All right. So we have to talk about when she decides that she's going to leave and she can't stay. First of all, just because that whole theme of the idea of Rochester and him believing that what he feels most to be true is the truest thing. Mm-hmm. And her believing that feeling is in direct argument with truth or will set itself up as truth.
Yes.
So that now she has to lean on these precepts that came beforehand and what she believed before, regardless of what she feels, because that's the reason that they are here, is to tell her when her feelings are telling her whatever it is, to tell her what is good and true and just. Rochester believes that, if I feel something so deeply, it must be true and right and just. And she thinks if I feel something so deeply, I must examine it. It must not be so.
Wow, I love how you're framing that. Like, I frame this in a different way that relates to St. John a lot, but I love how you're framing it because in the period of romantic literature, that's a central conversation kind of culturally. So yeah, so that is kind of the essential question. And so that's interesting. Like, is Charlotte Bronte perhaps she's actually fighting back a little against this, this trend that had been happening of like, all that matters is feeling, is that, if feeling is the most essential thing and that is the basis of all truth.
Right.
Versus something that came before that, which was, rules and, and doctrine and things like that. And that's truth. And perhaps maybe we could say that what Charlotte Bronte is doing is integrating them, is saying, okay, we did this whole...
I think absolutely that's what the book is doing and what Bronte is doing is this integration. Absolutely.
Huh.
Yeah, I think that Rochester is all feeling and feeling is truth. St. John is all doctrine and duty is truth. And Jane is learning how to filter those things for herself and not adapting either, or not adopting either, rather.
Okay, I have something to say about that. I love that. That is all true. And I love that you put those 3 together that way. And I'm going to put the 3 of them together in a slightly different way.
Excellent. Okay.
Wow, it's so interesting because I feel like what you just did is usually the analysis I would do, and now I feel like I'm about to do an analysis that was like I was very conscious of your stuff.
Okay. Oh, do you want to do that now, or are we still going to talk about the fight a little bit more?
Okay, let's talk about fight a little bit more, and then I'll hold on to my thing. Wait, remind me. So you said that, that Rochester is all feeling, and St. John is all denial of feeling, and Jane is the integration. Okay.
Yes.
I'll remember that for when I have to say my thing about how the 3 of them relate to each other.
Okay, perfect. All right.
And I think both are true. It's not something, I'm not saying something that argues with that. It's 2 layers that now I want to think about how they interact with each other. Okay, more about the fight.
More about the fight. Okay, so Rochester knows how upset she is. And I found this fight very sexy. I'm just going to go ahead and say.
Sure.
All right. Rochester, God, he wanted her anger. Like, he wanted her to rail at him. And she not only doesn't rail at him, but doesn't give him the full forgiveness expressed aloud that she gives him immediately in her heart. Like, it's more important to her, first of all, to know how she is feeling than to express how she is feeling, which I found just so very Jane and fascinating and beautiful.
And she's also very aware of how she's completely conscious the whole time of the choices she makes about her expression, how they will affect him.
Yes. She is the most thoughtful, fighter. I don't know how to put it. Like she's in this conflict. She's facing this conflict with the most, just discernment and vision and care and caution. She's meeting her feelings so much with this, not only reason, but she's also thrilled by it. Like when she talks about why he's about to go off the handle and become violent with her. And she talks about how she gets this feel of like an Indian in a canoe going over the rapids. And she's like, wait, I can still do this. I can manage the situation, which is,
I know,
probably problematic. Like it's a little weird, but again, in this book with Jane, with Rochester, it's fine. All is good. I like it. But
right. It's definitely a scene that if someone described it to me, I would just be like, whoa, I don't like this.
Danger, do not like.
Right,
yes,
exactly.
Run, get therapy. No.
Exactly. Well, okay. We could argue possibly therapy.
Well, they do need therapy, obviously. Yeah. Yes.
Therapy
Yes,
may
therapy.
have served these two.
Sure. But I do think that there is a good way to fight, and there is a good way for couples to fight. And this fight is good, especially considering that Rochester is.
From her side, it's good. She's
Rochester
doing a good
becomes
job.
good too, though, I think, because
Okay.
when he starts to lose control, right? And she begins to basically emotionally manipulate him, which I am never for ever. I'm not for this. Fascinating as these two characters working together through this conflict, because she says she's been holding back her tears this whole time. And at this point, she lets them course. She lets them come. They're not insincere. She's not faking crying so that she can turn the situation around. She is reminding him.
She chooses the time.
What matters and what is real. She's calling him back to his better self, which is what Jane has done from the beginning for him.
Yep.
So that's really, really beautiful. Yeah. I'm not prescriptive, but beautiful to read just now in this particular scene. When he says to her, you know, I am a scoundrel, because obviously he's believed this about himself the whole time. Then tell me roundly and sharply, don't spare me. And she is not feeling anger just now. And so she doesn't fly at him, even though that's what he wants. And she does often comply. We know this about her, especially later, but with him, she tends not to. And she says, I cannot. I am tired and sick. I want some water. He heaved a sort of shuddering sigh and, taking me into his arms, carried me downstairs. Then gives her wine and like food and this quiet care. Finally, for the first time, he stops making demands of her. He stops telling her what she's feeling. He stops telling her who she is. He stops telling her all the things that he does for him. And for like 20, 30 minutes or whatever it is, he just silently, carefully cares for her and lets her be. And I thought that was really, really beautiful. It only happens in a few lines.
Still.
But I liked it.
No, but I mean, could we then pinpoint his later growth? I mean, this might be a turning point for him, or likely is a turning point for him, because he is a different person when she comes back to him. And I don't think it's just because she left him. I mean, it might be that this interaction actually gave him the opportunity to finally... I'm going to have to just talk about the thing with him and St. John.
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Do it.
I mean, I don't know how much we need to like talk a lot about St. John. Everyone knows who St. John is. I mean, St. John...
If you haven't read the book, you don't. He's never in the adaptations that I can think of.
Okay, let's just assume...
Also, personal casting, Paul Bettany, just so you know.
I know, right?
Yes.
Perfect.
Thanks.
I agree.
Good.
I forget who it is in the different ad, but no, he does show up. I think he is in the one with Toby Stephens. He
Excellent.
is there.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yes, you do have that. You
I'm
have the
looking
whole
forward to
voice, and again, I might be confusing them all. Don't get upset with me, listeners, if
It's
you all
okay.
know the
We're gonna
adaptations.
figure it out. Yeah.
We will. A month from now, we will know all about adaptations. This is the division I see. Okay, yes, you're right. Rochester is all feeling an emotion and justifying that, and St. John is all holding that back, and Jane's in the middle. But there's another essential thing that's going on in this threesome, is that even though those two are like on opposites of that spectrum, they both do everything for themselves. Like St. John likes to pretend that he's doing what he's doing for the greater good and all of that, but all of his talk about ambition, he knows this. He knows this about himself. He knows that deep down, he, some part, if not all of him, is actually doing this so for his ambition, for his sense of self. that he's doing this to make himself feel important, to make himself feel tied to God. I am positive this has to do with all sorts of stuff that was going on with different types of Christianity at the time.
At the time,
Yes.
yes. An evangelical missionary,
Right.
especially, yes.
Even though Rochester is going all into emotion, but that's all about himself. I mean, he's
And
for
self-serving.
him, right? For him, it's obvious he's self-serving. Like even this fight, even when he's like says, I think part of him wants her to fight against him because the more he's subjugated, the more he feels justified in his own bad behavior. Right? So if she fought against him, he would be justified in fighting, in trying to convince her even more. If she gives in, then he has to.
I didn't see that. That's interesting. I don't think that I agree, but that's a very interesting read on it. Yeah.
But okay, but aside from that, I think that it's all him, right? Obviously, he says that himself. He knows that he's doing all of this, that it's all about, it's all centered in what gives him joy, what gives him gratification, let's say. Let's use gratification as the word.
Okay,
He's
sure.
not a joyous character.
Not joy.
No,
yes.
like, nor St. John.
Is there a joyous
right. I was like, I'm
I
not
think
sure
probably
joy
not.
is really
Yes.
a word.
Maybe
that we say.
Adele is the only joyous
Right.
character in the whole thing. Yes.
She totally is.
Yes.
And St. John also, even though he's self-sacrificing, so he's not self-indulgent, he's self-sacrificing, but it's still based in his self-gratification.
Sure.
Jane,
Would you say on this, in the world now, or
Yes.
for his
Yes.
heavenly reward?
Oh, no. I think in this world now, that's where ambition, he uses the word ambition so many times. And it's not just an ambition to heaven. It is for his ambition. Like he says specifically, I want to influence people. I want to have power. He says that.
You're right. Ugh.
Right? And so
Wow.
you could, when you're hearing him say that, be like, oh, well, he's saying I want to be a missionary because my ambition would lead me to politics or something like that. But the two are completely tied for him. Like he wants to have influence over people. This is why his behavior towards Jane makes so much sense to me. And she even says that about him, is that he wants to dominate.
Yes.
He doesn't want to serve. He wants
Right.
to dominate. And this is why I dislike St. John so much.
God.
St. John is, like, for me, the worst character. He wants to
The
dominate.
fascinating thing about St. John to me is, of course, he's completely unsympathetic. I hate him. And he's the worst part of like my personal experience with religion, just personally.
Mm-hmm.
But what's fascinating to me is that Jane does not.
Nope.
She never hates him. She never
hates him. She recognizes what is not good about him.
Yes.
'Cause
Well,
she-
she does that throughout the
Right.
novel to everybody.
Exactly.
She recognizes what is not good about them. But the fact that the last two the last two paragraphs of the novel are a reflection on St. John
I know. Ugh.
is so weird. It is so weird, Daphne.
She's just a way more generous person than me, because I'm just like, the last two chapters, I'm like, you know what? I really wish this St. John just like bad shit happened to him. I mean, it did in the end, but I mean, it's just like, I don't want to be charitable to St. John. He makes me really angry. He's horrible. He shames her so much. Like,
I know.
And then when she
No,
won't marry
and-
him, he even shames her for not going to India without marrying. I mean, just
Yes.
she cannot win. Like he has, and I think also the contrast. Oh wait, but I still haven't gotten to where the threesome. Okay, so
I'm
my
sorry.
thing.
I'm sorry.
No.
Back
not
to
at all.
threesomes,
This
by
is
all means, Daphne.
Yes. Another black sales joke, everyone.
Sure. Yeah, that's what that was.
Oh, sorry. And life joke. And so we've got these two men who seem opposite, but both are living for their self-gratification. And again, and dominance. Jane lives to serve. And her gratification, this
Yes.
goes back to my whole thing about how
Oh, God,
her
yeah.
wanting to be loved gets tied to her serving. But I don't mean serving in a way that is not reciprocal. That she finds a world in the end where her need to love and her nature to serve find a place where they are free-flowing between them.
Oh my God,
And
you're
that's
right.
when
She
she finds
says
peace.
that, and I still
Yeah.
missed it.
And that's where she finds peace. And this, for me, is the ultimate distinction in the characters when you start thinking about it, is that there are characters who live for their own gratification, even if they seem good. This is where good and evil become moot. Because you would look at Rochester and say, oh, he's evil. And you would look at St. John and say, oh, he's good. because
or wicked maybe, but yes.
okay, fine, whatever, wicked, whatever.
Sorry, no, it's okay. Very specific.
Right.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Bad and good, however you want it.
Yes.
But ultimately, the real division in the world is to what extent people serve others and to what extent they are self-serving. And that Jane finally finds a place where she can serve others and be served by them as well. And that's the ultimate integration for me.
That's so interesting. Yeah, because she says to him, I remember thinking that it was a little bit strange that she said to him that I love you better now because I'm more useful to you.
Right.
Which I thought was strange. Because first of all, Rochester obviously always thought she was incredibly useful to him, just like on a personal, emotional, deep level.
She didn't see it. She didn't see her value to him.
Fascinating. Yes.
And that's when he heals.
Oh my God.
Like that was so fascinating also is that, it's almost like the universe like put him in this position for him to learn. He needed to learn the humility. Yes. And he, it was like now he was a person who actually, okay, I'm not saying he had an easy life. I'm not trying to turn him into some spoiled brat who had this wonderful life and was like,
sure.
But I think that him actually having physical hardship that matched what his emotional state always had been, that he was blind and now he's blind, that he felt powerless. And then losing a limb actually was like, okay, dude, now you're going to actually not be able to see and not be able to take care of yourself. And I feel like when the two of them find their integration, where he is truly honoring her and she gets to serve him. And again, I don't think that they're later, when they meet up again, I don't think their interactions are actually, the mood of their interactions is different, but I don't think the substance is any different. I think that each of them was unable to see their value to the other person. And that their state at the end puts them both in a position where they can see that. And that, I don't want to, not to do the whole cliche about you have to love yourself. but it's just like, it's almost like,
sure.
It's almost like they were both so focused on what the other one, how wonderful the other one was without understanding the flip side. And so that free flowing thing of service and being served can't happen unless you see your own value as well.
I do like that. And God, that's so different from how I was looking. I think I was caught up so much in that like distinction between, feeling and duty. And I was trying to understand because I felt like we were cheated out of a bit of Jane's integration because Bronte killed off Bertha. And that's like, it takes the conflict away. Like now there's no reason for her not to be with Rochester.
Yeah,
But if you look at it that way, then that becomes less like I suppose that suggests that Bertha was never the real obstacle between them anyway, that the obstacle was that they had placed themselves on uneven footing, which is interesting because they keep calling each other their equal. Like she says, I am your equal. And he says, yes, you are my equal. And it's like this big sexy moment between them. But
I think there's a difference between knowing it and really feeling it. And that's the difference.
Exactly what I was thinking.
Right.
Like, again, asserting it and believing it are different.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah. And this is, again, back to this idea, not autonomy. What was the word? Liberty. I think that she finally truly chose him because she chose him from a place of understanding her worth. She knows her worth.
Oh, I know my value.
Right.
Yes. I always love that. Thank you, Peggy Carter.
So she understands her own worth after all she went through. And I think she had to go through the period with St. John. I really do. I think she had to, because she's so attracted to it, She's so attracted
she was drawn to St. John in almost the same way she was drawn to Rochester. It was this very like compelled moth to a flame. Like she could see herself putting herself to death, she said, putting part of herself to death. And even to the very end, it was so hard for her not to just acquiesce and marry him.
Right. Exactly. But she has much more self-awareness about it now. Like she understood that, she like went through lots of thought processes when she was in love with Rochester. And she wasn't in love with St. John, but she was not drawn to him. That was the right. She has because she learns, because she goes through these things, when she's with St. John, the level of self-analysis she goes through in thinking about what's going on here, of questioning herself, of why am I doing this? And even so, when they're actually having conversations, you see her going against the things she had decided. You know, and then she'll say that too. She's like, I was under his sway, like somehow something about me. And she says, I will die. Like if I marry him, I will die.
I know, Jane. Yes.
And she doesn't just mean because she's going to a tropical country with diseases.
Right. Right. Yes. She means her Janeness, her innate self will die.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so I think she had to go through that too. Again, this goes to this whole thing of like the universe. Like the universe had to bring her again. And it is an interplay. She chose to leave Rochester. She chose to like do that crazy thing of just like running away with nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think Bronte does suggest that it was, in fact, there's some sort of higher power in this novel, because the fact that she hears the Jane when she's on the moor, and he hears, wait, I am coming. Like, there's no way to get around. There's some kind of supernatural element that is present and true and real in the narrative, I guess is the best way to put it.
Maybe on some level she is a fairy.
I am all right with that.
Yeah, me too. Like maybe there is some element of her.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this whole book is such a fairy tale. Again, like the odds of her going as far as she goes, not knowing where she's going, having absolutely no intent, and just landing with her only relations in the world. Like this is serious fairy tale stuff. And then suddenly having a fortune.
Right.
And then coming back to find him again in the house that's like been taken over by nature, and standing out in the rain and reaching. Yes, all of it is very classic fairy tale.
I loved the take. I mean, I was just trying to like kept thinking, I was like, you know, is like, could we like bring some Sleeping Beauty into this? Like because that his house is Thornfield, that he's in a house at the end that has been overrun by nature, and that she has a hard time getting to it. Like she's actually physically having a hard time finding it. So it is almost like there is some aspect of like that he has gone into some other realm.
Sure. Oh, that's so interesting.
I know. See, there's
there is so much in this book about like other realms and other worlds, and this like crossing of thresholds and going over these styles and entering the moors, and the way the moors are different from the woods, are different from the fields, are different from et cetera, et cetera.
Right. And each person's relationship with nature, like that.
Yes.
Like I just found it, you know, that she notices that St. John like isn't interested in walking in the moors, and even when he does it, he's like going with a purpose somewhere versus
but then he has that moment where he does like the goodbye to his homeland, and like, I'll carry you with me in my heart, and she's like, what is this and where does it come from?
Right. Oh, that's true.
I would love to talk to Charlotte Bronte about St. John, because I don't understand, and I can't tell how much of it is just because of my personal, but you seem to have the same reaction where it's just like, I hate this guy, but she seems genuinely to respect him and to find his place in the world, like as a virtuous function of man.
Oh, right. I mean, again,
he gets the last line of the novel. Why do we give St. John the last line of the novel? Is it sarcastic?
Okay, let me say, I have an idea for this.
Okay,
this goes back to my idea about like that. What are we using? Good and wicked. The good and wicked aren't really categories. That it's about self-serving and serving others. I think maybe we could say that everyone serves a purpose. And this goes to the fact that Jane even forgives Mrs. Reed. I mean, I feel like Mrs. Reed is, you know, she's the worst.
Of course.
She's the absolute worst, right? We can declare her the absolute worst. And yet Jane forgives her, and that does Jane good. Right. And I don't feel like that is a moment. Again, that's not I'm okay with that moment. Like I'm often the person who's like, no, don't forgive those people. But this one works for me. Perhaps like we have this question of personal choice and, you know, providence or God or nature or the universe or however you want to call it. Perhaps there's a worldview here where everyone has a purpose, that all types of people have a purpose, and that even someone like St. John, who has ambition, who has all this stuff about being self-serving and dominating and stuff like that, that even, like, again, my modern view of people who went into places like India to be evangelists is not great. But again, that's me judging them from my own perspective in this time and my politics and my feelings about colonialism, right? So I'm not saying I need to shed that. Like, that's one way I can look at St. John, but I think the way the book is looking at St. John is that he is actually, that these things about himself do drive him as much as they would be damaging to Jane. They drive him to do good things. Like, it's horrible out, and yet he goes and tends to the sick parishioners. He does good in the world. So perhaps what the book is saying is that we just don't need to judge people that harshly. Is like, Rochester's the obvious version of that he's a reprehensible person that we have sympathy for, and we want him and Jane to be happy at the end. And so perhaps we're saying the same thing of St. John. I mean, I think that the most telling part is when his sisters were talking to Jane about him proposing, and they are good. Like, there's no question, you know what I mean? Like, they are in the category of what we love in the human, in people in this book, that they love learning and community, and they're generous and all the things that, like, we obviously, they are another oasis for Jane, right?
Yes, certainly.
And they love him. And they believe he's good. And even Jane believes he's good. Like, the only person... I think that Jane very much delineates that he is good, but he's not good for me.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Again, don't get me wrong. I hate the dude. But but I'm just saying, perhaps in the worldview of this novel, there is a space for people to, even someone like St. John, to be flawed, but still have a purpose, still be part of this plan, part of this universal thing.
Right. I mean, Jane clearly feels that way. I mean, the last couple of paragraphs of the novel, I mean, she's speaking incredibly highly of him.
Yep.
And saying how happy that he's serving this excellent function in the world. I mean,
exactly.
She really,
he
really talks him up.
Again, I don't, in my nowadays self, with my understanding of colonialism, I don't think he is serving the world. Although,
no, I don't either. And I wonder, like, it almost reads as like a satire about how you can't quite get out from under, because he's
it totally works
like,
as that too.
If it was a modern novel, like, he is the patriarchy, right?
Absolutely.
And this last paragraph is like, and even now she can't get out from under it because it's so deeply ingrained that she has to please him and love him.
Totally works as a reading too. I mean, that's the reading that my nature is more prone towards. Right? Is like, and maybe that works too.
But then it's so tragic for Jane.
No, but
But
Jane's not perfect either. And Jane's the last person who would want Jane to be perfect.
God, yeah.
Right? So maybe that's the
she is no Mary Sue.
Right.
I will give you that.
Exactly. So maybe that's the best reading of it, is like, yeah, he's an ass, and Jane's, she can't help herself. She can't help herself from wanting to love him and be loved by her. Oh God, that's tragic, but beautiful. You're right. Or can't help herself by, on some level, still thinking other people are better than her, which does make sense also.
Yeah.
She's hard.
But she is content in having found her way.
Right.
But still.
Yep. She's. I mean,
still sees.
She's
others
harsh on.
as,
She's harsh on herself to the
very hard
last.
on herself. Yeah. Oh. Wow.
Or maybe Charlotte Bronte just, was just like, I'm not going to give you the fairy tale happy ending because, I mean, I doubt that. I mean, Charlotte Bronte sees the world. The world is raw for her. The world is honest. So to make this all wrapped up tight with a pretty bow at the end actually doesn't seem to suit the story at all. It's not a pretty story. It's a beautifully written story, but it's not a pretty story. The people in it aren't pretty. I mean, some of them are, but you know what I mean? Like,
I do. Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense, actually.
This is a story that's just like in the mire. It's the muck of humanity and the beauty of the muck of humanity.
Yes.
I mean, that's the thing.
Yes,
is like,
absolutely.
But I mean, actually, this is making much more sense than the thing I said about the world being forgiving. I like this much better. Just like, yeah, you know what? Sometimes things still suck. You get your happy ending, kind of, with your two people who aren't beautiful and are kind of flawed or super flawed, but love you, but flawed in a way that they suit each other.
Yes, sure.
And And yeah. And even still, our heroine, you know, as integrated as she is, she still thinks someone like St. John is kind of better than her.
Oh, God.
That's okay.
No, it's beautiful.
Right.
No, it's incredibly great art, which is why it's 2017 and we're talking about this book.
Yep.
But, yeah, that is either inspiring to write another novel or forget it. I'm never doing it. Are you kidding me?
Oh, shush.
It's all already been done.
No, totally.
You know what I mean? That's what great art does for everybody. I
know. Yes.
It both inspires you to do better and more and also makes you feel like, but I'll never achieve that.
Right.
So, oh my God, which is exactly what we're talking about.
Right. Exactly.
I did it. Oh God. Wow. Okay.
We are all Jane Eyre.
We are all Jane Eyre. And yet she is the best of us. Yes. Uh-huh. Wow. Well, I guess that is a natural wrap it up, isn't it?
I really feel like we did it. I was so worried. I mean, there's a million.
No, this was exactly what I wanted it to be.
There are a million minute things that we could talk about, and that would have been wonderful. But I feel like this was a fun conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Have you a pocket comb about you, sir?
What for?
I need to comb out this shaggy black mane. I found you quite alarming when I'm this close, and you accused me of being supernatural.
Am I hideous, Jane?
Very, sir. You always were, you know.
You haven't lost your wickedness wherever you've been.
Yet I've been staying with good people. Far better than you. 100 times better. Altogether more refined and exalted than you will ever be.
Who the devil have you been with?
Elizabeth, before we wrap up this wonderful conversation about this wonderful book, what was your favorite part?
Oh, okay. I think I showed my hand here a little bit, but I think my very favorite part was that last big fight before she leaves and seeing all of her internal conflict, but also how she is like handling Rochester and how Rochester is just a force of nature. And she, that whole scene was just inexpressibly beautiful to me. And also Charlotte Bronte, when he keeps asking her, are you going to leave or you have to leave me? And she says, I do. She says, I do 3 times on her wedding day. And all 3 I do's mean I'm leaving you.
Wow.
It is impossibly good.
Oh my
God. It is so good and so beautiful. And him, like, his being so angry at himself and just wanting her to fly at him, and she doesn't. And her, just the way she handles herself through that entire conflict. It's gorgeous. God, I loved that scene. It was haunting.
That is gorgeous. I don't know if I have a favorite part. I mean, you just made that my favorite part. Possibly the chestnut tree scene is my favorite part.
Mm-hmm. That's very good. That's a close second for me.
That just struck me so much. Not as specific reasons for it, but it just... No, I do have specific. I feel like now I have more understanding of it than I did before. I mean, I think because that scene felt to me like the most quintessential, like, romantic novel part of the book, like with the storm and the this and
that beautiful imagery of the thread from his ribs to hers and bleeding internally, and God, it was just...
So that was just like the full on that, but it's already foreshadowing this choice that she's going to make that goes against that very type of novel.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like our conversation has made me understand why I love it more, perhaps.
Sure, yeah. Because it was very evocative reading it.
Right.
But understanding it thematically gives it more beauty, maybe.
Well, I understood in the context of the romantic style, because I'm familiar with that, and I have again, like I said in the beginning, I've had mixed experience. Poetry I'm a little better. I love the romantics. The poetry the poetry I have less mixed feelings about. But I feel like this novel that I always had firmly placed in that period of literature, and it is in that period, but in that genre, like, I feel like Charlotte Bronte might have been, again, like, kind of talking back to it at the same time, which makes it a million times more fascinating.
Yes. Yeah, I have so much respect for Charlotte Bronte after having read this book again. I'm going to have to add her to my list of the whole like 5 people you'd have a dinner party with or whatever.
Oh my God, right?
Charlotte Bronte,
I know.
you are now invited to the table.
Yeah.
Welcome.
I think the two...
Sit by me.
I know, seriously. It would just be like, sit by me. And I have a lot of questions.
Yes. Yes. Wow.
We could interview her. We've managed,
God, yes.
Right? We've managed to interview some really fascinating people, but she would be on my wish list.
Definitely so.
All right. So should I talk about upcoming episodes?
Yes, do, by all means.
Okay. So 2 weeks from now, we will be covering Outlander again. It will be me and Lauren and hopefully Barry Hardiman again. She would like to join us, so we'll just see if schedules align. And that will be episodes 7 through 10 of season 3 of Outlander. And then a month from now, you and I will be talking about adaptations. So we should probably choose which adaptations before 2 weeks from now so that I can announce that in the Outlander episode. And we will
absolutely so.
We will tweet about it as well. Also, again, reviews, very important.
Yes.
Also,
please and thank you.
Yes.
Please and thank you for the iTunes reviews. Yes.
Also, Elizabeth and I just did a special episode online for our patrons. So you can go to Patreon and be our patron. Even $1 a month makes a big difference for us. If everyone who listened to us gave us $12 a year, we would have a lot easier time running this business that we love.
Yes, we would. Yes.
And we would like to also be a little bit more comfortable in. So, so $1 a month would make a huge difference, and you get to see all sorts of special episodes and exclusive content that is just for our patrons.
Yes. You can hear me talk about Outlander.
You can hear Elizabeth talk about Outlander, which she did beautifully. So,
thank you.
Yes. So, thank you, everyone. We're really looking forward to talking about these adaptations. Now, we are going to have opinions, aren't we?
We are. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm going to watch all of them. So, yeah, we won't have to talk about all of them, but I'm personally going to watch all of them just because the story has just done so much and kicked open so many doors for me right now.
All right. I want to see the Kieran Hines, which I have not seen, which a lot of people told us about, and I love him.
Yes.
I love him.
We must.
Again. And you know what we're going to do is when we talk about the adaptations, we're going to talk about the
actresses. Yep.
We're going to subvert our own way of talking about it, but can't do that yet because we just have the actors' names in our heads because that's what happened.
I guess so.
I know.
Whoops.
Yeah. Not whoops. I mean, this is a moment of us recognizing our own part of the culture and how it has influenced us.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So
screw you, St. John.
Yep.
Anyway.
Okay, now I want a shirt that says "Screw you, St. John." Jane still likes him, but we don't.
We don't. Good for you, Jane. Bigger person.
Exactly. Yes, she definitely is.
Thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. Thank you, Daphne, for talking Jane Eyre with me.
God.
This was
so much
everything
fun.
I hoped for.
So much fun.
And until next time, I am Elizabeth Stevens.
And I'm Daphne Olive.
Bye.
Bye. Can I Just Say podcast is a Common Room Radio production. For more information and our other shows, visit commonroomradio.com. To show your support, pledges of as little as $1 a month can make a big difference. Visit patreon.com/commonroomradio to pledge support and access bonus features that are just for patrons. And join the conversation by using the hashtag #CanIJustSay and follow us on Twitter @JustSayPodcast. We request that you keep your tweets respectful and positive, and you can always email us at podcast@commonroomradio.com. Thanks for listening.